Hello and welcome. This is Books with Asia. I am Asia, and today I have for you my April wrap-up. I read 11 books in April, which is really good for me. I think I read 6 in March and like 3 in January and February, so this has definitely been my best reading month so far in 2022. I want to try to keep it quick and snappy. I don't want to go on for 5 minutes about every single book, so let's just jump right into it. The first book that I read in April is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. The Unbroken is a military fantasy. It follows our main character, Touraine, who is a lieutenant of like a close band of conscripts. And it also follows Luca, who is a princess who's trying to prove her worthiness to her faraway royal family. There is a sapphic romance. So let's see. This really had me, I think, in the first half. Like, C.L. Clarke's writing style is super, like, snappy and quick, and it's very direct, which lent itself very well to a lot of, like, high impact, like, high action, like, surprising moments throughout the whole book. But I think the writing style was kind of a detriment in many other moments. The second half of the book sort of lost me. Like, I had totally lost connection with the characters after the really exciting first half of the book. I will also say, as a positive, that I really love Touraine and Luca together. My absolute favorite line, which I will paste a screenshot of, happens in the beginning of sort of their relationship. I was not happy with how Touraine and Luca's relationship ended. And I'm not sure if there's going to be more books or what's going to happen. I don't know. It just sort of it just underwhelmed me. I also have some like very specific and small writing style nitpicks that I don't really want to get into because I'm trying to like keep it snappy, right? I don't know. It just didn't work for me. So I'm going to give it a 3. Okay, on to the next. So the next 2 books that I read, which I'm gonna, in the spirit of keeping this video a decent length, I'm going to talk about them together. That would be The Obelisk and The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. I basically binged this entire series because, like I've said a couple times already, this series totally grabbed me by the neck. It had a chokehold on my life. I'll hold these like that. How about that? I'm gonna try to not say any direct spoilers, but these are the continuations for the 5th season. I'm gonna try to be vague, but just be aware of that. Okay, so I'll start off by saying that I ended up giving both of these 4 out of 5. Very strong 4s. I don't really believe in doing partial ratings. Like, maybe somebody else who felt the same way as I did would give them like 4.5s or 4.75s. I don't want to do the fractional ratings. So these both get very strong 4 stars. And the reason for that is that in The Obelisk Gate, we follow Essen's daughter, Nassun, and we also get like a chapter or 2 from Shafa. I totally understand why we follow those 2 characters. It's just the thing is that I was so attached to Essen and Alabaster especially that I kind of just wanted the other POVs to kind of like to hurry it up and get it over with, which is like completely on me because, you know, obviously the story would be very different if we did not follow those 2 characters. And then in The Stone Sky we have Hoa in the past. The Hoa chapters in The Stone Sky were a little difficult for me to ground myself in because they were so far in the past. But of course, I mean, I'm not saying that those chapters were not needed because they totally were. They really added needed context. I will also say that I cried like a baby at both of these. This series has entered my like trilogy hall of fame along with like the Old Kingdom and His Dark Materials and Scythe. Okay, the 4th book that I read in April is We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. This is a YA fantasy. Follow Daniela, who has been training for years in this like special girls school to be a primera, which is, according to the world's mythology, one of the 2 wives that elite men in this world get to marry, the primera and the segunda. And the primera is expected to take care of one aspect of like the household, and then the segunda is expected to take care of a completely different area of household duties. So Daniela and her like rival slash enemy named Carmen marry a very elite young man who's the son of this like super affluent politician, and the story goes from there. I will also say that this also has a sapphic relationship, and Daniela and Carmen end up falling in love. Okay, so I read this via audiobook, and it is narrated by Kyla Garcia. It was a really, really quick read. I feel like it worked. It wasn't mind-blowing, and I wasn't obsessed with it, but it totally, like, the plot was good. The characters were all good. The husband is, like, almost cartoonishly villainous. He's a total piece of shit. It was fine. I don't know. It was fine. It was fine. It was pretty good. I definitely plan on reading the sequel as soon as I can get that from my library. I feel like this book was just executed really well. It's a very solid YA story. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Not the same kind of 3 stars that I gave The Unbroken, but definitely a 3-star. It didn't give me much feeling, but I do recognize that it is a very good book. So, okay, my next one. My next one. It is A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor, and there's not a whole lot to say about this. It is a monster reverse harem erotica about a maid who manages to get a job as an escort. As an escort is sort of I'm not really sure like what her job title would be necessarily. She gets picked out of her job as a maid and recommended to live in this house where women are there to engage in relations with monster men. This book absolutely succeeded in what it set out to do. It was a really quick read. I will say after that like extremely intense theater scene, it got sort of like overly focused on the plot. Like the reader in me appreciates that, but it killed the pacing, and I don't know if it's the right thing for an erotica. Overall, it was super steamy. Esther is a legend and a hero, and also I would read an entire book about Ezra. Maybe Esther and Ezra, maybe just Ezra. I do love how in like a monster harem where we have like sphinxes and vampires and etc. My favorite one is the one that's like basically just a normal dude. It's fine. I gave this book 4 stars, just recognizing that it totally accomplished what it set out to accomplish. Alright, so the next book that I read, and I have not done a write-up for this, so I'm probably going to be rambling, is The Midnight Lie by Marie Rudkowski. I read this via audio, and it was narrated by Justine Eyre. This is another sapphic YA fantasy. This one follows Nirim, who is a member of like a very low caste in society. And the word for caste that they use is kith. So she's very low kith, and she kind of just like lives and tries to get by. They also live in this sort of like sectioned off area of like the country that they're a part of. Nirim gets in trouble because she ends up actually being involved in the death of one of the guards who wanders around the ward. She ends up in prison where she meets Sid, who is from somewhere else. Sid is a very interesting character who sort of questions everything, is very clever. This book is sort of hard to describe. The prose is... First of all, okay, before I get into the prose, the narration took much longer to get used to than I would have liked. Very similar cadence for every single sentence. It didn't totally feel natural to me. The prose itself is interesting. Would I call it purple prose? I don't know. It's not direct. It's sort of flowery and kind of excessive at times. There probably were quite a few moments where I took issue with like specific spots in the prose, but overall, I think it added to the effect that this book had. The plot is also weird. I feel like this does not have the same kind of plot that we, especially in the West, have come to expect from a novel. I have no idea if this was done on purpose or not, but by the end, that little diagram of the Kisho Tenketsu story structure came to mind, and I was like, huh, was this intentional? Because it's not your typical kind of story structure. It was a little bit different. I think somebody who's very, very used to Western narratives, like myself, would feel that this doesn't really have a plot. But that said, I'm growing as a reader. I'm trying to, when I'm reading something that I feel like doesn't have a plot, I sort of put my brain in a different gear, tell myself to just sit with the characters, be present. I am really glad that I did for this book. It really, really surprised me. I did not really like Nureem that much. She's just so mild, I don't know. But Sid, on the other hand, Sid, oh my god, Sid. Have you ever read a better love interest than Sid? Sid absolutely saved this book for me. I am obsessed with Sid. I am reading the sequel for Sid. Well, I plan on reading the sequel for Sid. Sid was just so good. Like the constant questioning, the like charming sort of dashing, butchy, masculine sort of attitude and character was just, it was like chef's kiss all over the place. Absolutely loved her. I won't go on. I give The Midnight Lie 4 stars. I would say probably 2 of those are for Sid. I don't know if I would have finished this if Sid had not been a part of this book. Okay, my next one that I read is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. I also did not do a write-up for this one, so I'm going to ramble a little bit about this one as well. This one is a little bit easier to summarize though. It's basically told in letters. Like letters between characters is how you kind of unpack the story. I guess I'll say it's partially epistolary because the letters are broken up with short scenes from each character's perspective, and we follow Red and Blue, who are 2 agents on opposing sides of a time war. I think if I remember right, Blue is the one to first leave a letter for Red, and from there it's sort of like a cat and mouse, like sort of chasing each other through the braid of time, as it says in the book, leaving each other letters and eventually falling in love. So the main draw of This Is How You Lose the Time War is the prose. I will also say that it's very short. It's a novella, so it's only like 200-ish pages, right? Is that right? Yeah, it's about 200 pages. So it's a novella, it's very short, and the prose is basically the main thing that this book has going for it, which I don't say in a negative sense because, oh, and also I should say that this was a reread for me because I first read this in the middle of 2020. But I am so glad that I reread it because I ended up upping my rating to a 5. I was at probably like the 75% mark, and I was just sitting there reading it on my e-reader, and I had the thought, this is the perfect book. Which, like, that thought just came completely unbidden into my head. I am not like a fancy prose person. I don't really need beautiful prose. I just want the story to be told in the best way that it can. I probably have more highlights in this ebook than I have in any other book. But anyway, it's a quick read. Highly recommend. Absolutely loved it. Gave it 5 stars. Let's go on to the next. Okay, the next book that I read, also via audio, is Thickest, Thieves by Megan Whalen Turner. This is part of the Queen's Thief series, and I have a buddy who's like pretty, I would say pretty obsessed with this series, and I had asked them if this book could be read out of order because, so it starts with the thief, I believe number 2 is the Queen of Atolia, then the King of Atolia, and then I think there's like 3 or 4 more. Thickest Thieves is number 5 out of I believe 6. That's what the experiment was how I would experience book number 5 after having only read book number 1. This one follows Kamet, who is a secretary and a slave, and he hears that his master has been killed with poison. And terrible things happen to slaves whose masters have been killed, or whose masters die, I should say. And so he basically hits the bricks. He gets the hell out of there. He also runs into somebody that is from a neighboring country, Atolia, who is basically like, I am here to get you out, so come with me. And so Kamet and the Atolian end up on a journey to get to Atolia. This whole series, I guess I should say, is very much what I think of when I think of high fantasy. We've got very in-depth world building. We've got like vast kingdoms and like political exchanges between all the kingdoms. We've got gods and myths and legends and stuff like that. And it's fine. I don't dislike it. It just didn't super grab me. The thing that grabbed me in this book is 100% the characters. Like Kamet is this like a very interesting mix of like intelligent and clever and also extremely pathetic. And the Atolian is just sort of like a big, gentle, soft-hearted guy. And their chemistry is very interesting. I do plan on reading the rest of this series in order. I am interested to sort of flesh out the whole canon of this world in my head. I gave Thickest Thieves a 3-star, pretty positive 3-star. It just didn't get too much of an emotional response out of me, I guess. But it's a good book, and I'm going to continue the series, so. God, I like forgot all about this. I read it so fast. It is The Price of Salt, or Carol, by Patricia Highsmith. This was published in 1952, and it follows Therese. She's a set designer for stage plays, but she's just kind of like, she has this job in a department store that's sort of soul-sucking. It's there at this department store that she meets Carol, who like immediately grabs her attention. Their relationship develops over time. They go on a little road trip. What's interesting about this book is that published in 1952, which I know I already said, but I want to emphasize, it does not have a tragic ending for our gay couple. If you know about the bury your gays trope and all sorts of fun stuff like that, this is highly unusual. As I was reading it, it actually felt quite modern. Like the prose felt modern. The dialogue was not too old school or anything like that. It was a really well executed book. The only thing that I will say is that like contemporary or real life settings are not really my thing. This is why I can't read contemporary romance. I just get so fucking bored by the contemporary setting. But Carol is considered a classic, and so I wanted to read it for that reason. And I found it quite good. I don't want to judge it too hard on sort of the way the romance develops and stuff like that, because Therese, I think what we would call it now is insta-love. She basically, she sees Carol in the department store and tries to write her a letter and thinks about telling Carol that she loves her in this very first letter before they've even had any real contact. So, you know, there's that. But I do want to recognize that this was a very important novel for lesbians specifically, but I think gay media in general. It was an interesting read. I'm glad that I read it. I think I ended up rating it a 3. Just because of that whole contemporary setting and all that. But I'm very glad that I read it. Okay, those are all the books that I'm gonna rate. I have 3 more that I am not going to rate, and I will explain why. The first one is this Pablo Neruda poetry collection. I have been trying to read more poetry just to help my writing in the same way that reading novels helps my writing. I know basically nothing about poetry. I don't really know even how to interface with it. I don't know how to interpret it. I did tab, but all it is just lines that like conjured a vivid or interesting mental image for me. So that's why I'm not rating it, is because I don't really know enough to know how to rate this book. I don't know. I want to make a video talking about my rating system because it's kind of arcane and nebulous and weird. But yeah, it was good. I like poetry. You know, maybe the more I read, the better a grasp I will get on it. I don't know. Okay, the next one that I read that I don't want to give a rating is called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is totally nonfiction. Rebecca Skloot is a journalist who looked into the family of Henrietta Lacks. And Henrietta Lacks was a woman, a black woman who had cervical cancer. And in the treatment of that cancer, her doctor took some of the cancer tissue and like stored it for research, I guess I should say. Those cells that this doctor took continue to grow and still continue to grow to this day. So Henrietta's cell line is known as the first immortal cell line in science. And so Henrietta Lacks has been extremely important to cancer research and just science in general. Labs all over the whole entire world have some of her cells. This book focused very heavily on, mostly actually on Henrietta's daughter named Deborah. It focused a lot on Deborah's kind of journey with figuring out, not only figuring out what happened to her mother, because Henrietta died when Deborah was very young. So Deborah wants to know what her mother was like, what happened with her mother's cells. Deborah also wants to help the world understand just how big of a contribution Henrietta made to science. It brought up a lot of very intense questions about privacy and bodily autonomy and stuff like that. You know, Henrietta's cells were not taken with her consent. It's a very nuanced and complicated issue, and this book was very interesting to read. I think this is one of the books that I would recommend that almost anybody read. So, okay, my last one that I don't want to give a rating is a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado called In the Dream House. And this is Carmen Maria Machado's memoir of her abusive relationship that she had with her girlfriend. And it is framed using a great number of literary devices. It's broken into like many small to largish sections. Hi, Griff. Yes, you can come here. Where each section is the dream house as, for example, inciting incident. This book basically grabbed me in the first couple of pages. The prose is super incredible. It does lean sort of on the side of like sort of elaborate, lofty prose. This was also a very quick read. Again, I don't really want to put a rating on somebody's like real lived experience. It did get me to shed a few tears there towards the end, so it was a very good book, but I will not be giving it a rating. So I thank you all so very much for joining me. My cat is here now. I really hope that I didn't go on for too long. I don't really want these videos to be half an hour long like the last one. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, so before I left off, I wanted to sort of talk about what I am currently reading, like what can be expected in the next month's wrap up. And that is, I have two. The first one is Sandra Schofield's The Last Draft. This is a writing craft book about revisions. I am not very far in it. I've probably only read like 10 or 12 pages, but that will be coming up next. And then I have The Rise of Kyoshi. This one has taken me a while. I am kind of disgruntled with this book. I'm not really loving it. I really want to love it, but yeah, I will be talking about that in my next wrap up, or who knows, maybe sooner than that. I don't know. Okay. Again, thank you all so very much for joining me. If you were to subscribe to this channel, I would so very appreciate it. And yeah, I think that's it. Take care, everybody, and I will see you in the next one.